Over the past several months, the United States appeared to be adopting a more flexible position toward Russia. That perception was reinforced at the end of 2025 when Washington proposed a 28-point peace framework for ending the war in Ukraine. According to reporting at the time, the plan would have granted Moscow many of its core objectives. The initiative ultimately stalled after Ukraine proposed revisions and Russian President Vladimir Putin delayed a formal response. Analysts noted that Russia's continued hesitation may have tested U.S. patience. In parallel, Washington was also seeking to increase pressure on Venezuela, and these two factors appear to have contributed to a notable shift in U.S. policy. In coordination with the United Kingdom, the United States has since taken a more assertive approach toward Russian-linked oil shipments, without engaging in direct military conflict. According to the Telegraph, this shift began on December 17th, when U.S. President Donald Trump announced a blockade targeting all sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela. The administration framed the move as a measure aimed at increasing pressure on former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, whom U.S. authorities accuse of using oil revenues to finance criminal activity, including drug trafficking. In a public statement on Truth Social, President Trump said the Venezuelan regime had been designated a foreign terrorist organization, citing terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking. He stated that, as a result, the United States was ordering what he described as a total and complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers associated with Venezuela. The announcement followed earlier U.S. action against a sanctioned tanker traveling from Venezuela to Cuba and was widely interpreted as a warning to Maduro. However, the Telegraph notes that the message also carried broader implications, particularly for Russia. Russia operates a large shadow fleet of oil tankers, which Western officials and analysts say has been used to transport oil between Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. A blockade affecting Venezuelan oil routes therefore posed a potential challenge to Russian energy exports. In the days following the announcement, U.S. forces reportedly intercepted and boarded 2 shadow fleet vessels. Attention then turned to another tanker, formerly known as the Bella 1, which had already been sanctioned by the United States in 2024 over suspicions that it had transported cargo linked to Hezbollah. According to the Telegraph, the vessel was sailing under the Guyanese flag despite not being registered in Guyana and was attempting to bypass the U.S. blockade. When ordered to stop, the ship's multinational crew, reported to include Russian, Ukrainian, and Indian nationals, did not comply. What followed was a pursuit lasting approximately 3 weeks as the ship altered course toward the Atlantic. On New Year's Eve, Russia added the Bella 1 to its national shipping registry. The Telegraph reports that Moscow may have viewed this move as a final legal safeguard, calculating that U.S. forces would disengage to avoid potential diplomatic or legal complications. The vessel had turned away from Venezuela and was not reportedly carrying oil at the time. However, U.S. authorities continued the operation. Despite formal requests from Russia to halt the pursuit, the United States maintained its efforts to intercept the ship. On January 7th, Pravda reported that the United Kingdom had provided support to the U.S. operation. UK Defense Secretary John Healey confirmed that British armed forces assisted in the interception of the Bella 1, which had reportedly been renamed Marinera. While Healey did not disclose operational details, Pravda stated that Royal Air Force aircraft were involved. Later the same day, United24 Media reported that U.S. forces seized a second tanker in the Caribbean Sea, the MT Sophia. According to the outlet, the vessel was operating without a national flag and lacked proper registration documents. U.S. Southern Command released footage showing American forces boarding the tanker. U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem confirmed the detentions on social media, stating that both vessels had been operating under U.S. sanctions. Taken together, these actions signaled a more assertive enforcement posture by Washington. While no military force was used, the operations demonstrated that the United States and its allies were prepared to actively challenge sanctioned maritime activity linked to Russia and Venezuela. U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem emphasized the ongoing commitment to counter illicit funding for narco-terrorism, stating, "We will never relent in our mission to protect the American people and disrupt the funding of narco-terrorism wherever we find it." Analysts note that by the time of the recent tanker captures, former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was already in U.S. custody, suggesting that these statements also serve as a signal to Russia regarding the treatment of sanctioned shadow fleet vessels operating near Venezuela. The interception of two Russian-linked shadow fleet tankers represents a significant operational setback for Moscow. Reports from The Independent and Al Jazeera on January 8th indicated that U.S. President Donald Trump has endorsed a legislative bill designed to impose sanctions on countries purchasing Russian energy exports. According to Senator Lindsey Graham, a co-author of the bill, Trump's approval removes a major political hurdle and facilitates potential implementation of tariffs that could reach as high as 500%. While Trump's endorsement does not automatically enact the legislation, it must still pass through the standard congressional process. It has been interpreted as an important signal of executive support. Senator Graham, as cited by Al Jazeera, described the bill as a tool that would allow the U.S. to target countries purchasing discounted Russian oil, including major buyers such as China, India, and Brazil. The aim, he stated, would be to reduce financial support for Russia's military operations in Ukraine. If enacted, the bill could have a significant economic impact. Euromaidan Press notes that a previous 25% tariff on Russian oil imports to India led to a measurable reduction in shipments. A tariff potentially 20 times higher could influence both India and China's willingness to continue purchasing Russian oil at discounted rates. Al Jazeera reports that, as of November 2025, China accounted for nearly half of Russia's crude oil exports, while India accounted for 38%. The Independent highlights that together, these two countries constitute approximately 70% of Russia's total energy exports. The secondary sanctions bill was originally introduced in April 2025 and had garnered bipartisan support from 81 co-sponsors by May, according to Senator Graham's office. Observers suggest that earlier delays may have reflected Trump's belief that his personal relationship with Putin could facilitate a negotiated end to the Ukraine war without triggering a potential trade conflict with China and India. However, continued Russian resistance to peace negotiations, coupled with attempts to bypass the U.S. blockade around Venezuela, appear to have influenced a shift toward stronger measures. The United Kingdom has also taken steps to restrict Russian energy exports. As Euromaidan Press reports, in November 2025, the UK announced a phased ban throughout 2026 on maritime services, including shipping, insurance, and maintenance, supporting Russian LNG exports. This approach is notable both for its potential impact on Russian LNG shipments and because it precedes similar measures planned by the European Union. The EU's measures, in contrast, target LNG imports more broadly and have a deadline of January 2027. Euromaidan Press cites critiques from a coalition of civil society groups, including Greenpeace and Raise 'Em We Stand, arguing that the EU's timeline is too slow. The Irish Independent provides additional context, noting that in 2025, 76.1% of LNG from Russia's Yamal project, amounting to 19.7 million tons, was exported to the EU, generating approximately $7.2 billion, around $839 billion in revenue. Euromaidan Press further highlights that Greenpeace estimated the Yamal project produced roughly $40 billion in LNG revenue between 2022 and 2024. Taken together, these developments illustrate a coordinated effort by the United States and the United Kingdom to apply both operational and financial pressure on Russian energy exports. Analysts suggest that if the secondary sanctions bill passes and the UK's LNG measures continue to phase in, Russia could face both operational constraints on its shipping activities and a potential reduction in revenues from its largest energy customers. According to reporting from Euromaidan Press, revenue from Russian LNG exports, including those from the Yamal project, generated approximately $9.5 billion in profit tax, which has contributed directly to Russia's military operations in Ukraine. Analysts note that these funds could theoretically support the production of significant quantities of military equipment, such as Shahed drones. This context highlights how the EU's gradual reduction of Russian LNG imports continues to influence Russia's long-range strike capabilities. Existing sanctions on Russian LNG have had measurable effects. Reuters reported on December 25th that Russia was compelled to delay by several years a goal of reaching 100 million tons of LNG output annually. However, observers emphasize that additional measures could further restrict Russian exports. The United Kingdom has acted to limit its involvement with Russian LNG. while the EU has yet to match these efforts. Euromaidan Press notes that the Yamal project relies on 15 specialized RC-7 icebreaking tankers. 6 of these are UK-based and now subject to British restrictions, while 5 are operated by the Greek company Dynagas. Together, these 11 tankers account for the majority of Russia's fleet necessary for the project. Current sanctions have limited Russia's ability to replace these vessels, leaving the country largely restricted to test runs on newly built RC-7 tankers. Analysts suggest that if the EU implemented similar measures on the Greek-operated ships, it could significantly reduce Yamal project exports. In parallel with these energy export restrictions, the US and UK have actively targeted Russia's shadow fleet vessels. Reports indicate that Russia's approach toward the US has shifted from attempting negotiation to issuing warnings and, in some cases, making threats of escalation. On January 7th, United24 Media reported statements by Alexei Zhuravlyov, first deputy head of the Russian State Duma's Defense Committee, who suggested potential military responses, including attacks on U.S. naval vessels. Regarding the Bella 1, he described the U.S. boarding as piracy, and essentially the same as an attack on Russian territory, noting that the tanker was flying a Russian flag after more than a week of pursuit. Zhuravlyov also referenced Russia's military doctrine, which includes the potential for nuclear response under certain circumstances, citing the presence of Russian submarines and naval assets near the vessel. While the seriousness of these statements is difficult to independently verify, they indicate that US and UK operations have prompted strong reactions in Russia. The Telegraph highlighted this dynamic on January 7th, with senior foreign correspondent Adrian Blumfield noting that Russia has long sought recognition as a global equal to the United States. Blumfield suggested that recent events, including the pursuit and detention of sanctioned vessels, illustrate a notable shift in how the U.S. is treating Russian actions at sea. The White House has reinforced this stance. Pravda reported that Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt emphasized that while President Trump maintains a personal relationship with President Putin, the administration's policy is to detain sanctioned vessels when appropriate, and that Trump has expressed willingness to enforce this policy. Analysts have interpreted this as part of broader pressure linked to unresolved peace negotiations in Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has also commented on ongoing peace efforts. The New York Post reported that the ministry viewed a recently amended 19-point peace plan as insufficient for achieving a lasting resolution, suggesting that it would primarily continue the militarization and escalation of conflict. Observers, including John E. Herbst of the Atlantic Council, have argued that these developments reflect a relative weakening of Russia's geopolitical position. Herbst noted that, alongside the capture of Maduro in early January, the U.S. has acted in ways that challenge Russia's interests with limited repercussions. The combination of sanctioned vessel detentions, potential secondary sanctions, and allied enforcement appears to demonstrate a willingness by the US and UK to operate independently of Russian influence. Meanwhile, Russia faces additional external pressures. Protests and unrest in Iran, combined with constrained financial resources and logistical limitations, further reduce Putin's ability to project power in the region. Analysts suggest that these compounding factors illustrate a period in which Russia's perceived strength as a global actor is being tested more visibly than in recent years.